The smell of my stepfather's cigarettes had soaked into every corner of that house. Bitter and stale, like a warning I should have listened to years ago. He stood in the hallway with his arms crossed and that particular look on his face, not angry. Just done. The way you look at a broken appliance you've decided to throw out. My mother was behind him, her overnight bag already zipped, already by the door. "We leave at 7, my stepfather said. "You're not on the lease." That was it. No argument, no raised voice. Just a fact delivered the way you'd read a number off a receipt. I stood in the doorway to what used to be my bedroom that now had his son's hockey gear stacked against the wall, and a twin bed I'd never slept in pushed into the corner where my desk used to be. I was 17 years old. It was the night before my high school graduation, and the two people who were supposed to drive me there in the morning were telling me I had until sunrise to get out. "My name is Claire, and wherever you are right now, I need you to stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything for me, for my mother, and for a secret she'd been keeping since the day my father died." Have you ever had a moment where the floor just drops out from under you? Not a metaphor. I mean your actual knees buckle, your vision goes a little white at the edges, and your body forgets for a second how to do the most basic things, like breathe, like stand upright. That's what it felt like standing in that hallway with a garbage bag of my own clothes at my feet, because my stepfather had already packed my things for me. He'd used black garbage bags. Not boxes. Not a suitcase from the hall closet, black garbage bags, the kind you use for lawn clippings. My mother hadn't packed them. She'd let him do it. That detail did something to me that I still can't entirely explain. She had watched him put my life into trash bags, and she had not said one word. "Mom." My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "It's graduation tomorrow." She adjusted the strap of her overnight bag. She didn't look at me when she said it. "You're practically an adult, Claire. You'll be fine." Practically. Like the 8 months between me and 18 were some technicality, some loopholes she'd found in her own conscience. My stepfather picked up her bag for her. He actually smiled at her, this small, private smile, like they'd just handled something tedious. Like a lease renewal. Like a plumbing problem. Like me. I heard the front door close. I heard his truck start in the driveway. I heard it back out, and then I heard nothing at all except the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and my own heartbeat, which felt very loud and very stupid. Still trying so hard inside a chest that had just been hollowed out. I sat down on the floor of that hallway because my legs made the decision before my brain did. I sat there for a long time with my back against the wall and my garbage bags around me, and I thought about every moment I had missed or ignored or explained away. Every dinner where my stepfather talked over me. Every weekend plan that got changed because his kids needed something. Every time my mother laughed at his jokes a little too quickly and looked at me a little too briefly, like I was a responsibility she was quietly hoping someone else would assume. She had chosen him the moment he walked in. I just hadn't wanted to see it. My phone had 41% battery. I had $60 in my wallet, a debit card connected to a student checking account with maybe $200 in it, and nowhere to go. My two best friends both lived with families who were kind but small, cramped, no extra room. It was a Wednesday night before graduation. I couldn't call a teacher. I sat there and I tried to think, really think, past the roaring in my ears. And I kept coming back to one place. One memory. When I was 9, the year before my father got sick, he used to keep a shoebox on the top shelf of his closet. He called it his important box, and on rainy Saturdays, sometimes he'd take it down and we'd sit on the bed together, and he'd show me things. A photo of his parents on their wedding day. His military dog tags from before I was born. A birthday card someone had given him with a little cartoon dog on it that made him laugh every single time. After he died, my mother packed his things fast. Too fast, I understand now. But I'd kept that shoebox. I'd hidden it under a loose board beneath my bed, one of those things kids do instinctively when they sense something is about to be taken from them. And when my stepfather packed my garbage bags, he hadn't known to look there. I crossed back into that room and I pulled up the board and the shoebox was still there, dusty, held together now with a rubber band that had dried and cracked. I sat on the floor and I opened it in the dark with just my phone screen for light, and there near the bottom, beneath his dog tags and a folded letter I'd read so many times the creases had gone soft, was a birthday card. It was addressed to me. My name in my grandmother's handwriting. My father's mother, the grandmother I had not seen since his funeral, when I was 10 years old and didn't understand yet that my mother was already in the process of cutting every thread that connected me to his side of the family. Inside the card, in the same careful handwriting, Claire, I think about you every single day. I hope this finds you somehow. Please call me whenever you're ready. I will always answer. And then a phone number. And then, I love you more than you know. Grandma Ruth. The card was dated 4 years ago. She had sent it 4 years ago, and I had never received it. It had somehow ended up in my father's box, maybe tucked in by accident, maybe tucked in by my father himself before he was too sick to do anything at all. I still don't know. But it was there. Her number was there. My hands were shaking when I dialed. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. I held my breath through the first ring, the second. And then the line picked up and a voice said hello, and I completely fell apart. Grandma Ruth, I managed. It's Claire. I'm sorry it's so late. I didn't know who else to call. There was a silence. Not a cold silence, a silence that felt like someone catching their breath after a long time underwater. And then she said, very quietly, "Oh, my sweetheart, tell me where you are." "I'm coming." She drove 3 hours. I didn't know she was 3 hours away. I had no idea where she lived, no idea what her life looked like, nothing except that phone number and the memory of a gray-haired woman crying at my father's graveside, and my mother steering me away before I could reach her. My grandmother drove 3 hours through the night and pulled up in front of that house at 1 in the morning in a clean white Buick. And when she got out and walked toward me on the porch, because I'd been sitting on those front steps in the dark, too afraid to stay inside a house that no longer wanted me, I saw that she was smaller than I remembered. Older. But her eyes were my father's eyes, the same dark brown, the same expression that felt like it was paying very close attention. She put her arms around me and she held on, and I understood in that moment what I had been missing for 7 years. Not just her specifically, the specific kind of love that doesn't negotiate, the kind that doesn't weigh you against what you cost. "I've been trying to reach you," she said into my hair. "For years, Claire. I want you to know that. I never stopped trying." I believed her. I believe her more now than I did then. Now that I know everything, but even that night, without knowing any of it, I believed her. Some things you can just feel. She put my garbage bags in the trunk of her car herself, and she didn't say a single word about the garbage bags, and I loved her for that more than I could explain. Her house was 2 states over, in a small city I'd never visited. A tall brick house on a quiet street with a garden that had gone a little wild in the fall, and a kitchen that smelled like coffee and old wood. She'd kept my father's school photos on a shelf in the hallway. I stopped in front of them in the dark, still in my coat, and she stood beside me without speaking. And that was the first time I cried in front of her. Really cried. Not just the shocked, stunned, leaking I'd been doing since the hallway. This was different. This was grief and rage, and something that felt dangerously close to relief. She made me tea. She sat across from me at her kitchen table, and she listened to everything. The whole 2 years of it, my stepfather moving in, the slow erasure, the garbage bags, graduation in the morning. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, both hands around her own mug, looking at the table. "Your mother has been busy," she said finally. The tone wasn't mean. It was careful. Like someone who has been holding a very complicated feeling for a very long time and is finally deciding what to do with it. I asked her what she meant. She looked at me in a way I didn't fully understand that night. "Get some sleep first," she said. "There's time to talk about the rest." She drove me to my graduation the next morning. I wore the dress I'd bought myself with babysitting money because my mother had said the budget was tight that month, the budget that apparently had enough room for her boyfriend's moving truck, but not for her daughter's graduation dress. My grandmother sat in the 3rd row and she cried when I walked across the stage, and I could see her from up there, this small woman pressing a folded tissue to her mouth. And something inside me that had been very cold for a very long time began, cautiously, to thaw. That evening, after dinner, a real dinner, at a table set for 2, with food she'd made herself and a small cake with my name on it, she sat me down and she told me what she knew. My father, before he died, had set up a trust. It wasn't a fortune, but it was significant money from his life insurance, a small investment account, the proceeds from the sale of the house they'd owned before my parents divorced. It had been placed in trust for me to access at 21. My grandmother had been the secondary trustee, meaning she was supposed to be notified of any changes to the account and was entitled to quarterly statements. For the first 3 years, she received those statements. Then they stopped. She had called the trust company and been told that the contact information for the secondary trustee had been updated. She had called a lawyer. She had written letters to my mother. Every avenue was a wall. She didn't have physical custody. She wasn't my legal guardian. And my mother apparently very thoroughly, very deliberately, had made it almost impossible for her to access any information about me or the account. "How much is in it?" I asked. My grandmother pressed her lips together. "That's what we're going to find out." Her lawyer was a small, precise woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in a voice that never rose above a conversational murmur regardless of what she was saying. She was the kind of person who made you feel, just by being in the room, that things were going to be handled correctly. She had already been working on my grandmother's case. My grandmother had never stopped. I came to understand. She had kept this lawyer on retainer for 4 years because she never gave up, and within a week of my arriving, she had filed the necessary motions to get a full accounting of the trust. What came back made my grandmother go very quiet and still in a way I'd learned to recognize as her version of fury. The trust had been valued at just over $200,000 at the time of my father's death. In the 7 years since, the balance had dropped to less than $40,000. There were withdrawals, dozens of them, made through a power of attorney. My mother had obtained in the first year of my father's illness. A document she had apparently never disclosed to the trust company was supposed to expire upon his death, but which had been used continuously in the years following it. My mother had spent $160,000 of money that belonged to me. I sat in my grandmother's kitchen and read through the documents the lawyer laid on the table and felt something I can only describe as a rearrangement. Like the furniture of my entire childhood was being shifted to reveal what had been underneath it all along. The tight budgets, the cheap groceries, the secondhand school clothes, while her credit card somehow covered weekend trips and salon appointments, and, eventually, the deposit on a new apartment with a man who'd been happy to help her spend a dead man's money on herself. "What happens now?" I asked. The lawyer looked at me over her reading glasses. "Now we freeze what's left and we file a claim. Your mother will have a choice: return the funds voluntarily or go through the courts." She paused. "And given the documentation we have, the courts will not be kind to her." My grandmother reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. She didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't say I should have done more to stop this. She just held my hand, and I was grateful for that, because any more words right then would have broken something. The first call came 3 weeks later. I was in the garden, helping my grandmother deadhead the roses she'd been teaching me, quietly, patiently, things that required careful hands when my phone rang with a number I recognized. I went still. I looked at my grandmother. She looked at me. "You don't have to answer," she said. I thought about the garbage bags. I thought about the tone of voice my stepfather used when he said you're not on the lease, like I was a squatter, like I was a stranger who'd wandered in. I thought about my mother adjusting the strap of her overnight bag and not looking at me when she said you'll be fine. I answered, "Claire." Her voice was sharp in the way voices get when the sharpness is covering something else. "I've been contacted by a lawyer. I need you to explain what's going on." I sat down on the garden bench. I took a breath. "I don't think you need me to explain it," I said. "I think you know exactly what's going on." Silence. Then, that money was used for household expenses. "For your expenses, Claire, food, school clothes." "I wore secondhand clothes to my own graduation," I said. My voice was surprisingly calm. I hadn't planned it. It just came out that way, clean and flat, like a fact. "You used my father's money for 7 years, and you put my things in garbage bags, and you left me on a porch at 10 o'clock at night." "I didn't." She stopped. I could hear her recalibrating, deciding which angle to come at this from. "We can talk about this. Come home, and we can figure it out." "That's not my home," I said. "It never really was it?" Another silence, longer this time. "Grandma Ruth's lawyer has everything," I told her, standing up slowly from the bench, walking back toward the roses because I needed something to look at that was living and real. "You should talk to your own lawyer. That's the conversation that matters now." She started to say something else. I heard the beginning of it, something about how my grandmother had poisoned me, how I was being manipulated, how she was still my mother, and I thought of the trust documents spread across the kitchen table. All those withdrawal receipts, all those years of careful, deliberate spending, and I said, "Take care of yourself." And then I hung up. My grandmother was watching me from the other side of the rose bed. I lowered the phone. I felt lightheaded, but in a way that wasn't unpleasant, the way you feel after a fever finally breaks. "Okay?" she asked. "Okay," I said. The legal process moved fast once it started. My mother's attorney made several attempts to argue the withdrawals had been legitimate household and childcare expenses. The lawyer, my grandmother's lawyer, who was by now unambiguously my lawyer, produced the records. Exact dates, exact amounts. Cross-referenced against statements from my stepfather's credit card and bank accounts showing nearly identical deposits in the same weeks. The money hadn't gone to groceries. It had gone to vacations, furniture, a down payment on a boat my stepfather had sold 2 years later for a profit he'd kept himself. The judge was not sympathetic. My mother was ordered to repay 40% of the misappropriated funds, the portion the court could directly attribute to non-child care expenditures in addition to legal fees. The remaining balance of the trust was frozen against further withdrawal until I turned 21, at which point it would transfer to me in full, protected, with my grandmother as the sole oversight trustee. I was in the courtroom for the final hearing. My grandmother sat beside me in the front row, back straight, hands folded in her lap, wearing a dark blue blazer that I recognized from photographs of her at my father's college graduation. She had pressed it specifically for this day. I had noticed the hanger on the back of her bedroom door the morning before and understood. My mother sat at the other table in a gray suit, her attorney beside her. My stepfather was not there. I had heard through a brief, unexpected text from an old friend back home that he had left 2 months into the legal process, that the discovery of the trust and the incoming financial liability had apparently made my mother significantly less appealing as a high, long-term prospect. She was in the apartment alone now, the same apartment he'd moved her into, paying rent on a lease that had his name removed from it. I did not feel victorious sitting in that courtroom. That's what I want to say clearly, because I think people expect you to feel victorious, and sometimes that expectation becomes its own kind of pressure. What I felt was much quieter than that. I felt like someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and had finally been able to set it down on solid ground. The judge read the final ruling. My mother's attorney leaned over and said something to her. She nodded once, stiffly. She did not look at me. Outside the courthouse, standing on the steps in the flat November light, my grandmother put her arm through mine. We stood there for a moment without speaking, watching the street. And I thought about my father, about the shoebox, about the birthday cards he might have held in his hands in the last months of his life, hoping somehow they'd find me. About the dog tags I now kept in a small dish on my dresser. "He would have been proud of you," my grandmother said. I had to close my eyes for a moment. "I keep thinking about how he trusted her," I said. "With the money, with me. He trusted her. He trusted her to be the person he hoped she was," she said carefully. "That's not stupidity. That's love. But it doesn't mean the mistake was his." We walked down the steps together, and I let that settle into me. Slowly, the way warmth enters a cold room. It doesn't happen all at once. It takes time, and it takes someone leaving the door open. The months that followed were the first months of my life that I can describe, honestly and without qualification, as good. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just genuinely, quietly good. I enrolled at the community college 20 minutes from my grandmother's house, studying environmental science, something I'd wanted to pursue since a field trip in 7th grade that my mother had signed the permission slip for last minute, distracted, barely glancing at it. I started getting to know her, my grandmother, in real increments, the way you know someone when you share a house with them and see them at breakfast without their armor on, and hear them singing badly in the kitchen, and learn which topics make their face go careful and which ones make them laugh. I learned that she had called my mother's house over 60 times in the years after my father's death. That she had sent birthday cards every year until the address came back undeliverable. That she had twice hired a private investigator simply to confirm I was alive and in school, because it was the only information she could get. That she had paid her lawyer a retainer every single month for 4 years. Not because she was certain anything would ever happen, but because she needed to believe she was still fighting. I learned that my father had called her from the hospital 2 weeks before he died and told her to watch over me. That he had made her promise. That she had said I will and meant it and had spent 7 years trying to keep that promise against every obstacle my mother had constructed and had never once given up. I thought about that a lot. About what it means to promise something to someone who is dying. About the kind of person who keeps that promise anyway. Through years of silence, through walls and lawyers and disconnected phone numbers, through a daughter-in-law who had erased her from a family photo at a speed that should have required more guilt. She kept it. She kept it until a 17-year-old girl found a birthday card in a shoebox under a loose floorboard and dialed a number she'd never called. Sometimes I think about the version of my life where I didn't look in that shoebox, where I'd already sold it, or thrown it away, or never kept it in the first place. I think about it, and then I put the thought down because it doesn't help, and because what happened is what happened, and what happened brought me here. My mother called once more, about 4 months after the final ruling. It was a Sunday morning. I was in the garden again. I'd started taking over a corner of it, growing things from seeds, and the phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, and I looked at the screen, and I held it while it rang. I thought about what I would say, whether there was anything left to say, whether I owed her something beyond what had already been taken and returned. I thought about the airport story I'd heard once from someone else. A girl abandoned on a curb with a duffel bag, and how that story had felt distant and fictional to me until it didn't. Until I had my own version of the curb. My own duffel bag replaced with garbage bags that I would carry like a splinter in the memory of my own childhood forever. I thought about the fact that she was my mother, and I thought about what that word was supposed to mean and what it had meant in practice. And I stood in the garden in the November, cold with the phone in my hand, and I made a decision. I let it ring out. I put the phone back in my pocket. I kneeled down in the soil and I kept working. She didn't call again. The lawyer handled what needed to be handled through official channels, and everything else went quiet, and the quiet turned out to be something I had never known I needed as much as I did. There are moments, still, when I walk past the shelf of my father's photographs in my grandmother's hallway, and I stop. His graduation photo, his military portrait, a casual one from a camping trip somewhere in his 20s where he's laughing at something off camera and looks impossibly young and happy. I look at those photos and I feel grief. Because grief doesn't finish. It just changes shape, but underneath the grief there is something else now, solid and load-bearing. The knowledge that I was loved in a way that outlasted the person who felt it. That his love made provision for me even after he was gone. That it found me in a shoebox on the night I needed it most. I think that's worth saying out loud. Not because it makes everything okay, it doesn't. I spent years in a house where I was tolerated, and those years leave marks, and I am still, patiently, carefully, doing the work of understanding where the marks are and what shape they've left. But underneath all of it, underneath the years of secondhand dresses and tight budgets and a mother who adjusted her strap and walked away, underneath all of that, there was this. A grandmother who answered a phone call at 10 o'clock at night. A woman who had kept a retainer paid for 4 years on the faith that somewhere, a door was eventually going to open. I didn't lose everything. I almost did, but I didn't. Because someone refused to stop looking for me. I turned 21 last spring. The trust transferred on a Tuesday morning in a lawyer's office with very beige carpet and a potted fern that needed water. My grandmother sat beside me. She signed the final paperwork, handing the oversight over to me, and the lawyer passed the folder across the desk and said congratulations. And my grandmother looked at me with my father's eyes full of something too complicated to name, and I took the folder, and I thought of a shoebox and a phone number written in careful handwriting and a birthday card that said I will always answer. What are you going to do with it? My grandmother asked as we walked out into the sunlight. I thought about school. I thought about the garden and the seeds I'd started in little paper cups on her kitchen windowsill that spring. How carefully I'd watered them, how much I'd wanted them to grow. I thought about the environmental nonprofit I'd been volunteering with for 2 years, the work that felt like the only work that genuinely mattered to me. I smiled at her. "Something Dad would have liked," I said. She took my arm as we walked to the car, and she leaned her head briefly against my shoulder in that way she has, quick and warm, like punctuation. I was not the girl in the garbage bags anymore. I was not the girl who sat on a cold porch and counted 41% of a phone battery and tried to figure out where to go. I was someone who had been found, and who had found herself in return, and who was walking into a future that no one could take from her because she had built it herself, with her own hands, from her father's love and her grandmother's faithfulness and the small, stubborn fact of her own refusal to disappear. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.